Hello, I'm John Nicholson. Welcome to my YouTube channel. You know, the papers this week, apart from the budget, are filled with stories, as are the TV news bulletins, about immigration, and the pace of immigration has slowed down. Now, we're all being invited to think that this is a good thing. I never hear journalists question whether or not it's a good thing. So I've got a very different take from most politicians, or at least I'm prepared to say what I think about immigration truthfully, and it is this. I think immigration is a good thing. I think we should be welcoming immigrants. I think the idea that immigration is bad for the country is fundamentally wrong, and I really despise all the politicians who privately agree with me, but publicly turn up on the TV news channels and drone on about what a problem immigration is. Here is why immigration is good for us. The most important reason, of course, is that we are not having as many children as we need to have, given that our population is getting older all the time. Now, it's fabulous that we're all getting older. Of course, that's great. You know, when you think back to the old days, a man would retire at 65 and he would be dead by 68 or 70. And now people are living into their 80s or their 90s. I know that from my own family. My mum lived until she was 95 and in very good health for almost all of her old age. So how do we pay for all the people who are living to be so much older? How do we pay for the healthcare? How do we pay for the pensions? Well, it's blindingly clear. We need to have a working age population paying tax. And that means, given that we're not having enough babies, we need to allow people into this country, allow them to work and allow them to pay taxes. And that means immigration. And so immigration is good, of course, from that perspective. But the other thing you often hear is this fake news, to borrow a Trumpism, that somehow or other immigrants don't pay their way. This is also false. Immigrants pay more taxes over the course of their lifetime than native-born English people. Do you ever read that in the Daily Mail or the Daily Express or the Sun? Of course you don't. But immigrants pay more taxes. They contribute more to society than do people who are born here in the United Kingdom financially. That's a very important factor in the whole question of immigration. And then there's the question of the jobs that they do. I don't know if you've been to hospital recently. I hope you haven't had to go to hospital recently. But if you have, you can't help but notice that the majority of people in many of our big cities who look after us as nurses or care workers at home are not from these islands. They come from out with these islands. When my mum was in hospital towards the end of her life, there were Russians and Estonians, there were West Indians, there were Romanian nurses in Glasgow helping look after her. And the figures are astonishing when you hear them, which is that 27% of all nurses working in the NHS come from out with these islands. Now, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, and Keir Starmer are keen to stop these nurses from coming into the country, and they're putting all sorts of obstacles in their way. They have to have contracts for salaries that they never earn as NHS workers. They're also telling them that they can't bring their family with them. Just imagine that. They're needed in the NHS. They work for low salaries, but then they're told that they can't have the succour and support of their own families moving with them in order to make their home life and their working lives more miserable than they are at the moment. What an extraordinary position for a Labour government to take. So, of course, we need foreign-born people coming in to support the NHS. And you may know this, that there's a crisis in the care sector because there just aren't enough native-born people prepared to do the often menial, often quite unpleasant jobs that care home workers do. So we need people coming from abroad to work in the care homes. And then, of course, there are the other service sectors and the agricultural sector. You probably read stories of the last couple of years where food, and fruit in particular, has been rotting in the fields. How appalling. What an incredible waste. And that, of course, is post-Brexit. We're not getting the young EU workers that we used to get who would come to the fruit farms and they would pick fruit in their summer holidays and then return often to the Baltic states to go back to college or university. They're not able to get into the country. And all the ruddy-cheeked Brexiteers who used to complain about foreigners, they're not prepared to go off into the Essex countryside and pick fruit. So it lies rotting on the vines. Absolutely extraordinary. A final thought. When people complain about asylum seekers, we have a proud history in this country of welcoming people to this country who are fleeing persecution. We've seen lots coming from Syria, for instance. And the people who tend to come from Syria, they're not people with poor educational qualifications. They're often the very best qualified who can afford to travel from Syria and elsewhere in conflict zones to come to the UK. So there are people with qualifications that we need. Why don't we let them work? As an MP, I had a headmaster who'd fled persecution, who arrived in my constituency, applied to be allowed to stay and wasn't allowed to work. He said to me, I would happily work as a teaching assistant. I'm way overqualified for it, but I would happily do it, and I would happily do it for nothing, but I'm not allowed to do it. So we've got to send out a different message, those of us who believe in immigration. We've got to stand up for the rights of asylum seekers, because that's incredibly important too. And I think we shouldn't surrender to this ongoing rhetoric that immigration is bad for the country. The very opposite is the case. It's good for the country. And one final question for the Home Secretary, when she says that she will punish people who arrive in this country in boats, for example, because they should only travel by safe and approved methods. Next time you see a Labour politician, ask them what the safe route is into this country is for someone from Afghanistan. If you're a woman in fear of your life in Afghanistan, if you're a young gay man fearing for your life in Afghanistan, what is the safe route? There's no embassy in Kabul for you to apply for a visa. You can't leave the country legally. And if you do manage to smuggle yourself out of the country, how do you get into the United Kingdom? There is no route in. So challenge them next time you hear one of these absurd claims, because you can be pretty certain of one thing: you won't hear a challenge from the vast majority of journalists in the press and on television. And that's a poor thing. Thank you for listening. Please do feel free to comment below, and please subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe. It costs absolutely nothing, and I'll always be delighted to hear from you. Thank you.